At 2 a.m., smoke curled under my bedroom door like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Then the front door crashed open and a steady voice called my name. He carried me outside, past the sirens, and rescued far more than lumber, wires, and memories. He saved my heart. If this story resonates, please like, subscribe, and comment. Share it with someone who believes in second chances today, too. My name is Walter, though almost everyone in town calls me Walt. I'm 61, the sort of man who keeps spare readers in every room and an umbrella under the passenger seat in case the sky changes its mind. I've lived in the same modest Cape Cod for 26 years, long enough to know which floorboard protests and which window likes to be coaxed. I keep my yard neat in that good fences make good neighbors way, and I still send handwritten thank you notes because the world is fast and ink slows you down in the gentlest way. I'm not a hero by any stretch, not brave by instinct. I'm a retired postal worker and a part-time library volunteer who has learned that a kind word across a counter can be the difference between an ordinary day and an excellent one. I like pancakes on Saturdays, the local radio station on weekday mornings, and a golden retriever named Betty who snores delicately like a harmonica practicing in another room. That night, the night the smoke woke me, the air felt wrong before I understood why. It was a cold night in late January, and I'd left the heat on a bit higher than usual because the forecast had flirted with the word frigid. I woke to a smell like burnt sugar and old coins, and it made something in me sit up at attention before my body did. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, squeezed my toes into my slippers, and called for Betty. She was already standing, ears up, tail stiff, staring at the crack under the bedroom door as if it had said her name first. I opened the door and the hallway looked hazy, like a memory. There are different kinds of smoke, I learned later, but right then there was only this stinging fog that tasted like panic. I did the thing we're taught. Crouch low, cover your mouth. I did another thing we're not always taught. I said my own name out loud like a pledge. Walt, we're okay. One step at a time, because I have found that sometimes your own voice can be as steadying as any handrail. Betty pressed against my leg as we crept down the hall. The kitchen was the culprit. An ancient outlet, older than good sense, near my coffee maker had betrayed its years. The wall was darkening, a little flame licking upward like a flicker of nasty cheer, and the room was huffing smoke into the air with a confidence I hadn't granted it. Keep a fire extinguisher under the sink, because my dad was that kind of man, prepared not in a paranoid way, but in a pragmatic one. I pulled the pin, aimed, squeezed, and swept like the label says, and the flame shrank back obediently. Then from behind the outlet, another, as determined as a dandelion pushing through a crack. The smoke alarm above the pantry began its shrill sermon. Betty barked, a sharp, terrified bark that said, "This is not pretend." I had my phone in my robe pocket. I always do because I am older and I have learned. I dialed 911 with hands steady from habit. The dispatcher was calm, precise, and sounded like someone who would also remember my birthday. Address, nature of emergency, anyone else inside. Just me and my dog, I said. Electrical fire in the kitchen. Smoke, no big flames yet? I used an extinguisher. We're heading outside now. I set down the extinguisher like I was setting down a heavy thought and took Betty's collar. I'd like to say I walked out without looking back. I didn't. As I moved toward the front door, I glanced at the refrigerator covered with magnets, at the photo of my sister holding her twins under a 4th of July sky, at the little ceramic lighthouse my late mother gave me for my first Christmas in this house. It wasn't the stuff. It was the life. I hesitated a second too long, coughed hard enough to see stars, and then the siren was near. The sound of a fire engine in a small town is a promise and a prayer wrapped together. The front door didn't stand a chance. It burst with purpose, not violence, and a wave of cold air came in like a good idea. Through the gray, I saw a figure in turnout gear, reflective strips catching the light like a lighthouse at midnight. "Walter!" The voice was confident and warm, like the first cup of coffee from a favorite diner. My name in that tone anchored me. I raised my hand, and an arm made of reassurance and training closed around my shoulders. "I've got you," he said, and those 3 words were a bridge over a river I hadn't realized I was crossing until I was on it. We moved as a unit, Me, him and Betty in a determined trot, as if he'd practiced this exact dance with my kitchen 100 times. Out we went, onto the frozen lawn, my slippers gathering cold, the winter sky a flat black dome dotted with a few stubborn stars. The night air was a gift. I gulped it like a man who had been given his own breath back. I heard other voices, efficient and kind, moving past me into the house, and I felt gloved hands settle a blanket around me, an oxygen mask gently placed, the miracle of a paper cup of water appearing as if it had been waiting on the brink of the world to rush toward me. Betty pressed against my knee and rested her sweet head on my thigh with a sigh that sounded human. I stroked her ear. "Good girl," I told her, and by extension myself. The firefighter who had carried me out lifted his visor and looked at me in the direct way people look when they want to see the truth of you quickly. He was in his mid-30s maybe, with coal-black hair damp with sweat, a strong mouth, and green eyes. Not bright like a traffic light, but rich and deep, like a patch of summer woods you know by heart. Soot marked a quick line along his jaw like he'd been kissed by the night. "I'm Cal," he said. I nodded and tried to say thank you, but the oxygen and a coughing spell had a long list of objections. He understood anyway. "You did the right thing calling when you did," he said, and then repeated it as if he could feel the urge in me to argue. "You did the right thing." The crew worked with competent choreography. No panic, no wasted movements. Someone told me what was happening as things happened, which I appreciated in the way a person who has lived a whole life appreciating plain talk appreciates it all the more when it's wrapped in care. "Electrical short," one of them said to another, then turned to me and translated kindly. An outlet got tired of trying. They shut off the power to the affected part of the house, checked for heat in the walls, sprayed the smoldering spot, cleared the air as best they could, and made notes on a clipboard as tidy as any I ever kept sorting mail. I have always admired people who bring order to a mess and do it with gentleness. Cal came back and crouched in front of me so I wouldn't have to look up. "You won't be staying inside tonight," he said, in the tone of someone telling a friend what they need to hear. "It looks like we caught it in time. There's damage, but it's limited. We'll get an electrician to confirm, and I can swing by tomorrow off duty if you'd like me to walk you through what we saw." He didn't have to offer that. It landed like a small lamp switched on in a dim room. "I'd appreciate that," I said, voice low but steady. "I'm Walt." "I know," he said, smiling like the fact that he knew my name mattered beyond triage. "You're Walt who brings the peanut butter cookies to the library bake sale every June?" I laughed, then coughed, then laughed at the cough, and a measure of fear drained out of my legs. The crew finished their work, taped a polite sign across the kitchen doorway that essentially said, "Don't cross this until we say so," and a lieutenant with kind eyes explained the next steps like they were giving me directions to a favorite diner rather than to the beginning of a repair. The neighbors had gathered across the street, wearing coats over pajamas, holding mugs and concern. My friend Lena, who lives 2 doors down and knows how to take charge without making you feel commandeered, waited until the official people were done and then hustled me to her car. "You and Betty are staying with me tonight," she pronounced. No arguments. Lena's guest room smelled like lavender and laundry soap. She tucked a comforter around me the way people tuck comfort around fear and said, "I'll set the coffee to brew at 7. Betty's snores settled into their harmonica rhythm. I blinked at the ceiling, at the little shadow a hanging plant made, and tried to gather my thoughts like a dropped deck of cards. I kept arriving at the same card. Cal's voice saying, "I've got you," and the way it sounded less like a line and more like a promise. Morning arrived with coffee strong enough to wake the good parts of me. We walked back to my house in the pale sunlight that makes January look soft. My kitchen was a diagram of a mistake and a second chance, a blackened patch near the outlet, a road map of gray across the ceiling, a few glass things angrily cracked. The rest was intact but humbled. I stood in the doorway and put a hand on the frame like you do with the shoulder of a friend who's had a scare. Lena squeezed my arm and began making a list with me because that is our love language. Itemized hope. Call insurance. Call electrician. Call contractor. Get the air purifiers. Bag the drapes for the cleaner. People worry that lists are cold, but I've always found them warm. They are plans, and plans are kindness. Around 9, a Navy SUV from the fire department rolled up and parked at the curb. Cal climbed out in jeans, boots, and a department sweatshirt that told a second truth about him. The hero of the night looks just as sturdy in daylight. He knocked on the jamb and stayed on the porch until I waved him in. Permission matters, even when the door's in crooked, he said, half a joke, half a declaration. He carried a clipboard, a tool bag, and a calm that seemed packable. He nodded to Lena, crouched to greet Betty with a, "Hello, ma'am." That turned my heart into a friendly porch, and then looked at me in the way you look when you want to be sure someone slept and ate. We walked the kitchen. He explained patiently how heat creeps up inside walls like a tourist looking for shortcuts, how bad wiring can behave fine until it decides not to, why a cheap power strip can cost more than it saves. He spoke in plain English, not jargon, and drew a small sketch on his clipboard that looked like a map and made me feel a little less like I was wandering without street signs. He checked my smoke detectors and replaced a battery on the spot, the way people fix the squeaky hinge without being asked. He gave me a few pamphlets that were more helpful than bossy. I thanked him so many times I sounded like a stuck record, but gratitude feels better worn out than withheld. When we ran out of practicalities for the hour, he gestured toward the street. "There's a diner 2 blocks down that makes pancakes that could settle anyone's nerves," he said. "I'm off duty. Would you consider letting me buy you breakfast? Strictly pancakes and conversation. I know mornings after a fire can feel like you're walking around inside a story someone else is telling." I said yes, because everything in me wanted to. Also because I have a rule at this age. If the kind thing is offered by the exact right person at the exact right time, you accept it graciously and add a star to your internal map of the world. The diner is the sort where the coffee cups are sturdy and the waitstaff calls you hon without condescension. Cal sat across from me in a sunlit booth with a view of the street we both knew by heart. He ordered a short stack like a reasonable person, and then, when I raised an eyebrow after the first bite, ordered another because they were more than good, they were healing. We talked about practical things first, electricians, contractors. He had recommendations ready, and not the kind that end in a shrug. These were names with character references attached. He told me what to ask for, what a fair price should sound like, where to be stubborn and where to be flexible. He made me a little timeline on a napkin. And if you ever want to make friends with a retired postal worker, give them a timeline that fits on a napkin. Then, as the second pot of coffee arrived, the conversation drifted into the places that make breakfast a prelude instead of just a refueling. He asked me what I did before retirement, and when I said I'd walked this town for 30 years, he grinned. "So you're really the one who knows where everything is," he said, and he meant it both literally and like a gentle joke. I asked him how he chose this work, and he told me about a first summer as a volunteer at 19, how the first time he rode in the jump seat, his heart thudded in a way that felt like it had found its right job. He talked about the quiet parts of the work, the rolling of hoses, the cleaning of gear, the way you learn to cook for a crew, and how spices double as a language. He mentioned the hard calls, with the frankness of someone who knows the difference between what's yours to carry and what's for the whole team. And because time has taught me that a conversation isn't a game of chicken, but a chance to be whole with someone, I said gently, "Are you partnered?" He nodded once, then again, like he was agreeing with something larger. "I was," he said, and he said it like a fact he respects, not a wound he hides. "We were together 5 years. His name was Luis. He got sick. He fought like a champion, and then he rested. He taught me that making a perfect grilled cheese is not a silly skill. I still use his trick of adding a slice of tomato." I reached across the table and let my hand rest near his for a moment, a simple offering of presence. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm grateful you had that and sorry for the end of it." He met my eyes and nodded, and in that exchange was a kind of trust I hadn't expected to feel this soon. He asked me in return, and I told him I'd spent 14 years with a man named Jim. We'd built something sturdy and kind, and then we had drifted the way some rivers do, the currents not unkind, just separate. We parted with respect, the way grown men should when they can. He lives in Arizona now and sends me pictures of sunsets that look like they were painted by a generous 7-year-old. I told Cal that I've been alone for a while, not lonely exactly, but accompanied mostly by Betty, my radio, and neighbors who have known me in every season. The waitress topped off our coffee and slid the check between us. Cal snagged it neatly, and when I started to protest, he shook his head in a way that brooked no argument without being ungentle. "Let a firefighter buy pancakes for the man whose house he helped save," he said, and then softer, "Let me do this." I let him. In the weeks that followed, my life turned into a patchwork quilt of errands, decisions, and small victories. The electrician came and shook his head over the old wiring as if it had been playing poker with loaded dice for years. He and his assistant replaced the faulty lines with clean, new runs that made a hum like good news. A contractor came with a crew that spoke softly and worked hard, and if you've ever had strangers in your kitchen for 10 days straight, you know the value of both of those traits. The smell of smoke slowly ceded territory to the smell of fresh paint and sawdust. And the first time I fried an egg on the new range, the sizzle sounded like a blessing. Cal didn't disappear into the night the way some figures in emergency stories do. He texted every few days, not in a way that crowded, but in a way that said, "I haven't forgotten you." "How's the kitchen today?" he asked one Wednesday, and when I sent a picture of a wall half-primed and a note that said, "Looks like the world's shyest." "Sunrise," he sent back a laughing face and a, "Save me a seat at breakfast when you're ready to christen the place." He invited me by the station on a Sunday afternoon when the crew was making stew big enough to feed a ship. I brought a loaf of bread and a modest nervousness. I met a handful of men and women who, without making a show of it, opened their circle and scooted me into it, cracking jokes that were kind rather than cutting. I chopped carrots to earn my keep and listened to stories about calls and cook-offs and the ladder truck mishap that became town lore when a raccoon got involved and everyone lived to laugh about it. The first time Cal came to my house after the work was done, he stood in the doorway and smiled at the new paint like it was a kid fresh from the barber. "You did good," he said, and the "you" felt like he meant me and the house both. He'd brought a casserole his mother taught him to make, a chicken and rice affair that tasted like home even in a kitchen that still felt like it had only recently remembered its own name. We ate at the small table that used to feel like it had room for two, but now felt, oddly, like it had room for exactly two. Betty lay at our feet and sighed dramatically when the casserole dish made it onto the counter without a single morsel mysteriously falling to the floor. We laughed. We told stories about first cars and worst haircuts and the taste of water from a garden hose. He washed, I dried, and the kitchen sighed in its new old way. Content. After we finished, we stood side by side at the window, looking out at the maple tree in the front yard that has anchored my street through storms and summers. I felt his hand hover an inch from mine, a question asked in the language of air. I answered by turning my palm up and letting it find his. The warmth was not dramatic, not cinematic. It was certain. He squeezed once. I squeezed back and felt something in my chest exhale that had not taken a full breath since the night the smoke curled under the door. We are not young, so we did not rush. There is a wisdom to letting something unfold that has taken me decades to learn. We took walks by the river, the three of us, 2 men and a golden retriever. We talked about books we loved and the way the town changes and stays the same, and the neighbor who mows in perfect stripes and the other neighbor who plants zinnias with joyful abandon. I learned that Cal keeps a garden behind his row house and that he coaxes tomatoes into sweetness and prunes roses with nearly religious reverence. He learned that I can fix almost anything with a tube of wood glue and patience, and that I can make a lemon loaf that has been known to cause men to rethink their life choices. There are moments that test a new joy in quiet ways. One came in late spring when a thunderstorm unrolled across the hills like a dark blanket. The radio crackled, phones buzzed, and I watched Cal's face change into his on-duty face, even though we were sitting on my couch with a bowl of popcorn between us. "I have to go," he said, apologetic but already halfway into his boots. I have always admired people who answer when the world calls. I watched him run through rain and disappear into duty. The house felt too big without him, the storm louder, the popcorn suddenly unnecessary. I did what I do when the unknown is under my roof. I made a pot of tea, folded laundry slowly, and talked to Betty like she could answer. Near midnight, my phone lit up with a single line. Safe. Long night. You okay? I texted back. Okay. Proud of you. I slept on the couch that night in the living room where the windows allowed me to look out and see the maple nodding in the wind. Some kind of ancient conversation happening between tree and storm that required neither of our input. He came by the next afternoon, rain-spotted and tired in a way that sunlight could not quite fix. I opened the door, and he stepped into my arms with a soft sound that wasn't quite a word. We stood like that for a long time, two men holding on to the simplest truths. You went away, you came back, I waited, I welcome you. There is a holiness to that exchange that does not require a church to officiate. Not every night is made of silk. One Tuesday, I made plans in my head that I did not speak aloud. I imagined us at the jazz night at the VFW hall, imagined a shirt he'd look good in, imagined the way the old songs would lift and make candlelight out of ordinary bulbs. He called an hour before and said, "Walt, I'm sorry. We're down 2 at the station. I'm covering overnight. Rain check?" I said, "Of course," in a tone that almost meant it. I hung up and felt my old, clumsy friend named Disappointment sit down too heavily at my kitchen table. In younger years, I might have let him invite his cousin Resentment. Instead, I took a walk, muttered kindly to myself, and returned to write down what I was feeling like a letter to a person I wanted to keep. In the morning, I brought 2 coffees in cardboard carriers to the station and left one at the desk with a note that said simply, "I like you even when schedules are rude." He texted an hour later. "You just solved 8 problems I didn't know I had." We began gently to collect a life. He left a spare jacket on my hall rack. I kept a toothbrush at his place. He learned the creak in my stare, and I learned the way he likes his eggs. Over medium, salt first, pepper second, hot sauce sometimes, depending on how the day felt. We noticed the ordinary miracles. How the house sounded when both sets of keys jingled in the bowl by the door. How dinner for 2 made the table lean in as if the furniture was listening. How sleepy conversation. Right before sleep has a truth to it that daytime chat can't manage. We did not make big proclamations. We made pancakes. We fixed a wobbly chair. We bought a new smoke detector together, and he taught me to change the furnace filter without cursing. In early summer, Betty, who had made it to 12 with all her grace and most of her mischief intact, slowed. There are turns of the calendar that ask for softness from all involved. We took her on shorter walks and longer car rides, held her when fireworks annoyed the night, made ground turkey because it made her eyes bright, and laughed at the way she still wagged with her whole body at the doorbell like a welcome committee of one. When her time came, it came kindly with a vet who made house calls and a blanket that smelled like our life. We cradled her head, whispered the thanks she'd earned, and let her go when she sighed a sigh that said, "I have done my job." We buried her under the maple and planted herbs there, sage and rosemary and thyme, because it felt right to flavor the air where she rests. We cried the clean tears that don't require embarrassment. He held me, and I learned again how comfort can be a wordless thing that knows its language by heart. 3 weeks later, we drove out to the shelter on the edge of town to drop off the extra bag of food we'd purchased before we knew we wouldn't need it. A small brown dog with white paws and a hopeful grin pressed her nose to the glass of her kennel. And if you've ever been chosen by a dog, you know the feeling. We named her Ember because we thought we were being clever. It turned out we were being right. She galloped into our lives like a promise, kept slow and then kept fast, and the sound her collar makes against the water bowl has become, somehow, one of the sounds of home. Summer unrolled. We went to the farmer's market and bought more corn than we needed because once you start, it's hard to stop. We ate it off the cob on the back steps. We waved to neighbors and no longer had to explain who the other man was because we'd been seen enough times to make a new unit in the town's unwritten ledger. In the fall, at the firehouse chili cook-off, I put on an apron and stood behind a table with Cal while he teased me for making mine too mild. I told him it was not mild, it was welcoming. A teenager we both recognized from the library tried both and declared it a tie. and we laughed and agreed the child had a wisdom beyond his years. He danced with me later under string lights hung between the bay doors and the flagpole, holding me like a man who knows the value of steady. When winter came around again, we decorated simply. A string of lights across the porch, a wreath with a red bow that had seen better bows but still had the right spirit. A modest tree in the living room dressed in ornaments that felt like old friends, a paper snowflake from a niece, a ceramic mitten from a long-ago holiday fair, a tiny fire engine ornament Cal pretended to be embarrassed by and then hung front and center. We hosted a small potluck for a handful of friends and 2 colleagues from the station, and the house responded to laughter like a field responds to rain. Someone snapped a photo of us standing shoulder to shoulder. Both of us looking at the same thing in the kitchen. Something funny. I can't even remember what, and I keep that photo tucked in a book I open often because it reminds me what ease looks like on my own face. On the anniversary of the fire, we made a ritual. We checked the smoke detectors, replaced batteries, reviewed the exit plan, and set the extinguisher within easy reach. We did it without fear or fuss because safety had, over the year, become a language of care between us. Then we ordered Chinese takeout and ate it on the floor like teenagers of a certain gentler sort, reading our fortunes aloud and pretending to believe them. An unexpected windfall will come your way, mine said. Already did, I told the cookie, and Cal kissed my temple with a yes in it. Around that time, he said, standing in my kitchen in sock feet, I don't want to make a speech. I want to hand you a key. He did, palms up, a simple brass key without flourish. If you want me, he added, I want to be the man who brings the mail in on days you forget and changes the light bulbs in the hallway before you even notice they're out. My heart, a practical thing with a flair for the sentimental, recognized a proposal more perfect than jewelry. I took his key and then returned the gesture, reaching into the little dish by the sink and plucking out the spare. The sound a key makes when it joins your ring is delicate and affirmative. It's a kind of music. We both listened for it and smiled when we heard it. We did not need to announce anything formal to anyone because the town already knew in the way towns know, gently, with casseroles at the ready. We settled into the rhythm of a shared life. We each kept our own habits, my early morning news, his late-night book chapter, but we braided them together loosely and with respect. He learned that I need 5 minutes after I wake up before I can talk to anyone, including the person I like the most. I learned that he likes to wash the car on Saturday mornings because it makes him feel like the week has been honored. We kept a little notebook by the phone where we wrote down groceries and small appreciations. You fixed the mailbox and didn't brag about it, because compliments sometimes land better when the ink is dry. If you're watching this because you like stories about love that arrives after other chapters have been written, this is where I tell you the part that matters to me most. It isn't the big swoops. It's a Tuesday night when the meatloaf turns out just right and the dog learns stay on a dime. It's the way he reaches for my hand when the ball game gets close in the 9th. It's the way I reach for his shoulder when the song on the radio is the one his mother loved. It's the small, constant saving we do for each other without fanfare. He takes the trash out before the snowstorm. I tuck a note in his pocket on a shift that will be a long haul. It's the faith that the door you broke open to rescue a stranger can be the same door you walk through every night on your way home. We went to the coast in early spring to watch the ocean wake up. We stayed at a bed and breakfast run by a retired pair who served blueberry pancakes with a generosity that bordered on mischievous. We walked on the beach wearing hats and sensible shoes, because at our age your knees and ears deserve respect, and we collected smooth stones that had a way of slipping into our pockets without asking permission. We didn't talk about forever. We talked about Tuesday, about which lighthouse we wanted to climb, about the book we were reading aloud to each other before bed. Back home, the maple began to bud again. We planted peonies near where we laid Betty to rest, pink as a blush. And when they bloomed that June, I stood on the porch and thought, this is what a second life looks like, a garden you tend, a house you love, a man who looks at you like you're the answer to a question he meant to ask all along. Sometimes people ask me, in the gentle way of neighbors who want to know how to hold your happiness correctly, what the fire taught me besides the practical bits. I say the obvious first. Check your smoke detectors twice a year. Replace old cords with new ones. Don't overload outlets. Keep an extinguisher in the kitchen and in the places where you know heat lives. Then I say the other truth. Sometimes a crisis introduces you to the version of yourself who knows how to accept help and later how to accept love. The night Cal carried me out of my home, he saved wood and wire and books and a ceramic lighthouse. He saved a dog. He also carried out a part of me that had been sitting quietly at the table of my life, keeping my own company, content enough, but not expecting company. He didn't fix me because I wasn't broken. He knew better than to try. He did something braver. He stood alongside me while the smoke cleared and asked if I wanted pancakes. He kept asking the right small questions in the right voice until, one day, I noticed that the kitchen didn't smell like smoke anymore. It smelled like coffee. It smelled like breakfast. It smelled like us. On the second anniversary, we woke early. He made eggs with the precise timing of a man who respects runny yolks. I poured coffee with the reverence of a man who knows how mornings can go wrong without it. We tested the detectors, smiled at their righteous beep, and took Ember for a walk where the frost made lace of the grass. The sun took its time rising, and we let it. Back home, we sat at the kitchen table we'd sat at 1,000 times, and he reached out and tapped my hand twice, his quiet signal for, I'm thinking of the beginning. I tapped back twice, my quiet signal for me, too. Then I leaned over and kissed him, slow and certain, in the house that had been almost lost and then had been found in a new way. I sometimes think about the sound of the door breaking that night, the first one, the urgent splinter of wood giving way to duty, and how now the sound I know best is the everyday click of that same door closing gently on winter evenings. Both of us inside, the kettle beginning to murmur. I think about how the same house can host terror and comfort, loss and laughter, and remain itself, a shelter with our names on the mailbox. The town knows our story the way towns do, filtered through bake sales and block parties, told and retold with a rightness that never loses its warmth. People wave when we pass the station, and I chuckle when a kid points at the firefighter and then at me and whispers something like, "That's his person." There are worse things to be in this life than the firefighter's person. If you take anything from listening to me, sitting in your living room or at your kitchen table with your own coffee steaming, let it be this: prepare the way you can. Check the batteries, clean the lint trap, call the number when you should. But also leave room at your table for the unexpected guest named Joy, who sometimes arrives wearing turnout gear and sometimes wearing a plaid flannel and sometimes with dog hair clinging to his socks. Open the door when kind knocks, even if it knocks loud. Let steady hands steer you out of one hard night and into a string of good mornings. And when you can, when the air is clear and your heartbeat has learned the rhythm of home again, be that steady hand for someone else. The way we make it through this life is by carrying each other down smoky hallways when we must, and through quiet kitchens when we can, always toward the light.